This week on To The Contrary.
First, former President Carter says most religions are sexist. Then, marriage is declining while divorce is climbing. Behind the headlines, one award-winning TV writer tells you how women use humor to get through hard times.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay, and welcome to The Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, religion and women.
Former President Jimmy Carter has called out religious leaders for perpetuating sexism. In his new book, Carter says incorrect interpretations of holy books, particularly the Bible, are a major contributing factor to inequality between the sexes. The former president is still a Christian, though he left the Southern Baptist Convention due to its treatment of women.
It's the practice of religion that is a basic cause or the foundation or the excuse for other abuses, where women are deprived of an equal right to serve God, and where they are treated as subordinate or inferior people.
He stressed that Jesus himself never disrespected women, but later church leaders up to the present day have treated women as second-class citizens. Carter called for women to have an equal role in church, saying all are equal in the eyes of God.
So, Deborah Carnahan, is religion sexist?
Yes, absolutely it is in today's world.
I think it's interesting that he's so focused on the Judeo-Christian traditions here in the West, and it seems to be oddly ignoring real atrocities against women elsewhere in the world.
I think it's unquestionable that it is sexist, and so much justification for subjugating women in religion and in our societies is provided by these religious texts.
I have to say not necessarily. I think a lot of people incorrectly interpret religious teachings and use that as a crutch to say religion is always sexist.
Well, I want to say in his book, he says all religions. He goes into Judaism and Islam and Hindu and you name it. Sure. Some, of course, are worse than others. Some parts of for example, ultra-Orthodox Jews, and I come from a Jewish background, are much more sexist in my mind than Reform Jews are. But why did it? My question is, of course it is. We're in a situation where you don't have women priests. Right. And some churches don't even have women, local leaders, where women can't do this or they're not seen as that. Just because of gender. Why did it take so long for somebody to come out and say it? Somebody credible to come out and say it?
Exactly, because I think that women are afraid to speak out against their religion and against their church. And I think that is part of it.
Well, so is it women's fault that they allow this to continue? Because women are the backbones of every church. Why aren't they out there saying, I'm religious, I believe in God, I don't believe in your interpretation of the Bible?
They are. I think women increasingly are doing just that. Even the nuns are coming out speaking out about birth control. But I do agree with Rena saying that it's an interpretation issue. What I think is what is really important that Carter is doing is, this whole religion topic can be controversial, and people are scared to say anything because you get attacked, you get trolled. It's real. You get threats. But you
get threats from whom?
From the extremists. I can't tell you. Anytime I say anything about my religion, about Islam, it's always like, oh, well, that, she's she's the Antichrist or something. But I think it's interesting and important what Carter is doing is he's bringing attention to the fact that if we continue to systematically discriminate against 50% of the population, which is women, nations cannot progress, societies will not develop, and that is the core of the message.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just saying, I think it's important not to whitewash, all sort of lump them all together.
He doesn't say all, and obviously he's still religious and he belongs to some church, I'm not sure which, but he feels it treats women equally. But he's going to devote the rest of his life, he says, to this topic.
No, and I think there's absolutely room for a conversation here, but I also think it's important to point out that in the West, these are not state-based religions, right? People are free to leave, they're free to have a conversation, and in fact they are in the Catholic religion, in the Jewish traditions, they are having a conversation about this. Things are changing, so I think it's important not to sort of lump them together and suggest that in some way women sitting separately from men in a Jewish Orthodox synagogue is the same thing as real atrocities against women.
Look, Bonnie, I think it's very important, though, that people don't want to leave their church, to your point when you say you're free to leave. I grew up in a Missouri Synod Lutheran school and environment just 5 minutes from here, and my mother went to the same school. I questioned these things when I was younger. I wanted to light the candles. I wanted to not just sit with the first graders during church, but I was told that's what the boys do. And it's very hard to fight that. And the women teachers were not paid the same as men.
Well, you fight it by leaving.
I did leave, actually.
I mean, there are lots of lesbians, for example, who are Catholic, who just form their own Catholic churches in their living rooms.
Why do we have to leave? Why can't you accommodate me within this institution? I don't think the prophets have been sexist. I think it's been the interpretation, which is
and so many
but women are the backbone. I mean, women raise all the money. Women take care, you know, the nuns educate the kids and take care of everybody. And they do it in this environment that I sit there and I say to myself, what is wrong with this picture? Leave, form your own church if you have, if you feel like, or just, you know, look at
the
history.
That's the biggest thing. And as a woman, I've grown very frustrated seeing many of the world's major religions be hijacked by their most fanatical members.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the biggest problems we have today. Islam so wrongfully has been one of those, especially in our modern society. People have this picture of what Islam is, and unfortunately it's been hijacked by its most fanatical members. So women, we grow very, very frustrated with that, but we don't think of leaving. We think of how we can make change. And unfortunately, this change is going to be very slow.
I want to point out, by the way, there's a group called Karama, if you haven't heard of it, that says that sexist interpretation of the Quran is wrong, and they have scholars who show how that's wrong.
Unfortunately, the work they're doing is very important. I think in the years to come, especially in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to see more people forming groups like that, bringing awareness to topics such as that. Is that let's look at old scriptures and let's not let the most fanatical members determine the fate of this religion and the course that it's going.
Okay, but you are saying women are strong, and that's why they stick.
I think that's why we stay.
Maybe women
But I think a little bit of both is happening. A lot of women are leaving. A lot of women are trying to reform, you know, kind of work with what they already have to. I mean, there's a huge movement within Islam, a feminist reinterpretation of the Quran.
Yeah.
And that's happening across the board with, I think, Abrahamic traditions. But I also think Carter is specifically talking about some of the most extreme cases. And I feel like if you look at it, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, you know, all the Abrahamic traditions, yeah, the extremists are crazy. Those are exactly the people, if you say anything, are the ones that troll you online.
Well, and I want to go back to women because I agree with Bonnie. What's wrong with some of these women? I have heard them say, I don't care. I've got enough on my plate. I don't care.
I've actually heard that as well. I'll agree. I've actually fallen into that many a time because I'm thinking, I've got so much other stuff going on. Religion to me is very personal. My practice of it, I don't really discuss it with anybody, to be honest, because I find it to be so private. And so I almost have taken on that I don't care attitude, and I don't know if that's good or bad.
The higher road. I mean, you're going to tell me my God thinks that I'm worth less than you. You know, have a nice day. I've got other stuff to do. It's too busy.
But clearly, a lot of religions have also evolved. I mean, I think about the synagogue where I attend, and it's a female rabbi. This is very common now, and they've been very accepting of gay marriage. There's been a lot of changes, so I think that in many ways it's conservative, and I think there's in many ways there's just been a shift in social mores, and people are. You know, there may be some things that remain and fester, but there's also a lot of change that's happening, so it's not quite so black or white.
Women are the backbone, but we're also the mothers, and I think after a while it's like, I don't want my kid hearing this stuff, you know?
Well, and here's the other thing that I saw in the church I was in, and it's still going on. Women cannot vote, and they still are paying the women teachers less than the men because they say the men are the center of the family and they need to have more money.
I suspect that's what President Carter wanted to change with this. With him being as vocal, I think he was very frustrated with things like that happening, especially in a Catholic school where I grew up and not seeing any women at the altar, at the, you know, the front of the
There's
service.
A message there that you're being sent as a woman in these churches, and it's not a good message to be sending to our daughters.
And I say, overthrow it. Start your own church. Let us know what you think. Follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or at To The Contrary. From religion to marriage.
Is marriage losing its appeal as a life goal for young adults? A study by the Pew Research Center shows marriage has taken a nosedive. A mere 26% of millennials, now 18 to 33, are married. Since 1960, the marriage rate among adults has dropped 21%, and among 18 to 29-year-olds, it has dropped by 2/3. But the data also reveal the desire to marry has not changed and is strongest among young Americans. There are educational differences. College graduates are more likely to be married than those with only a high school diploma. That gap has risen to 16% today, up from 4% more than 50 years ago. Another new study challenges the idea that the divorce rate has flattened. The University of Minnesota report shows divorce rates are on the rise among baby boomers, while divorce among young couples is rare.
So, are we sad to see? I'm sorry, it got mixed up from the last discussion. We sad to see marriage dropping as a goal among young people.
Yeah. Yes, I think that this is a problem. I usually have the rosy outlook of how women and girls are doing, but I think that the decline in marriage is a serious problem, in part because we're seeing a rise in unmarried mothers who are unfortunately far less educated and less able to care for a family, and they're becoming the sole breadwinners. An interesting statistic is that in 1960, only 4% of unmarried women had never actually been married. They were widowed, they were divorced. Today, that number is 44%. So we're seeing a real cultural change here.
And it seems to be all about money and education, which kind of stinks.
Money and education, but you also have to think, we're comparing millennials to baby boomers. I think you just can't compare. I think, Gloria Steinem famously said, we are the men that we wanted to marry. And I think that today, more than ever, that statement is so true. We don't need men for anything. We don't need them for kids. We don't need them to work. We don't need them for our jobs. But I'm saying that before, for eons, the only aspiration women really had, the only career choice we only really had was to marry, and marry well. But now we're marrying later. Women are doing everything later. And I think it's interesting that even
But you're coming at it from an educated perspective. Highly educated perspective.
Yes,
what's really happening here is that high school dropouts and low-income people
unmarried women
are just having babies with whoever comes along,
but there also
not
is
getting
a question
married,
of debt
and hurting themselves so badly.
Yeah.
The worst thing, I'm going to sound so ancient, it's ridiculous, but the worst thing a woman can do to herself financially and education-wise is to have a child out of wedlock.
Yeah,
and
but you also see the boomers are getting divorced. My point is that I feel like even though 61%, according to this Pew research, still have the desire to get married, they're just doing it later. I feel like the overarching finding is it's just not a priority right now. The priority is relieving some of your debt, and also advancing your career.
I think this is, I'll agree with you on the apples to oranges comparison. Millennials versus baby boomers. I know a great many children of divorce, and unfortunately they hope to change that. They're saying, I don't want to give up like my parents did. I don't want to turn 60 and also take on this new chapter and take on a new lover or a new spouse.
But did their parents give up, or was it, hey, I got married when I was 20, now I'm 60?
Can I
have more options?
I think
giving up.
This is not simply like a conservative perspective. I think this is an economics one too. There's a great, fellow at the Brookings Institution, Justin Wolfers. He said, in economics we look at both cost and benefit, and too often with marriage we talk about the costs. But there's actually very serious, important benefits both at the individual level. Marriage provides a second income many times. It provides a safety net. It provides support, and at the societal level, because just because we don't have marriage doesn't mean that all of those things don't need to be fulfilled in some way. So what steps in when a spouse does not?
But we're also looking at this from the woman's perspective, which I understand that's what this show is about. But are the women, are they the ones choosing to get the divorce? Are the men the ones choosing to get the divorce? Who's instigating this? And let's not forget, we had a lot of unhappy, abusive marriages in the past that women could not get out of because the law would not let
they would
them.
lose their
the statistic is accounting for that, you're right.
Maybe this isn't as scary and shocking as it seems, but I do agree with Bonnie that there is a problem with young women having children out of wedlock. It's very detrimental.
There's no stigma anymore, and it's accepted, and the grandparents get so excited, and I think all that's wonderful, but I really wish that
Not if you're 16 and pregnant.
Right, exactly. And,
Right.
I wouldn't yet say it's fully accepted. Unfortunately, I mean, I think there is still a stigma, and especially when you talk about the classes, when you talk about a middle-class family and the daughters come home at 16 and pregnant, I think there's still a huge feeling that that daughter has failed in the world by not finishing high school and getting pregnant before finishing high school. But I want to go to upward mobility for a moment here. As a woman who now at the age of 30, getting married later this year, I'll tell you, I have not thought that I needed a second income. I thought I've got it on my own, and if I'm not happy with a man, there is no need to settle down.
well, but yes,
And I can
okay.
give up too.
So women,
if it's not working, because I can do this on my own.
That's true. Women certainly have more choices, but that should result in positive social change, not negative social change. And I think what's going on here, and you know, share thoughts, please, is the gap between rich and poor is growing so quickly. And so the gap in education is growing so quickly, and it's really hurting women.
Right, and I think what Bonnie is sort of alluding to also is that we're not talking about women like ourselves at this table. We're talking about women who don't have a family to come home to, who aren't going to shame them for this. And the fact is, instead of sort of pushing marriage as not the only sort of response, but something that really we should be emphasizing, we push government programs instead. And that actually further encourages these women to be in a sort of a cycle of debt and poverty.
And reliance.
Rather than saying you can build something and it's easier when there's two of you.
Well, I think we ought to push one government program, and that is handing out condoms and birth control. You know, I think that's a really good one to an unwed mother situation.
I agree with Deborah. I think a lot of this, actually, what we're not talking about is a result of years, almost a decade of abstinence-only education. Some of the poorer families and poorer women and girls are actually exactly the ones who don't have access to contraception or the knowledge about them, scarily enough.
Well, I mean, I think Planned Parenthood is sort of all over the place, so I'm not sure I completely accept that, but I mean, I think a bigger problem, I mean, honestly, I mean, earlier you mentioned
not all over the place in Texas anymore.
Well, maybe not in Texas, but I'm saying,
and it's being attacked to be completely defunded.
I'm happy it exists. I mean, as somebody on the other side, I am happy that Planned Parenthood exists for those who need it. And there are women who cannot afford to go to you know, a pharmacy and buy those contraceptive devices and the medicines that come with it. So it's good for that. I think that's fine. If you believe in that, go get it. There's someone to give it to you.
Right. Well, I mean, to your point earlier, I think we cannot sort of ignore the impact that someone like Gloria Steinem or Betty Friedan had on this conversation. There was this idea that you couldn't truly be equal, you couldn't truly be free unless you were without a man. But those sentiments may have been radical, but they have had long-term consequences.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to say you're not free unless you can control your own body. That's what they were saying.
You're not truly empowered, unless you have control over your reproduction.
All right, behind the headlines, how television treats female writers and producers. Women are better represented behind the scenes in TV than they are in the movies. One example, Cindy Shupak, a Golden Globe and Emmy Award-winning producer and screenwriter. She spoke to The Contrary about her newest book-turned-TV show.
Humor is definitely my coping mechanism, and it's a way, I think, to help others.
You may not know her name, but chances are you have laughed at some of Cindy Shupak's jokes. She was a writer and producer for such shows as Sex and the City, Everybody Loves Raymond, and Modern Family. And it's that same sense of humor that carries her through tough times.
Comedy is just the best way to get at some of these tougher subjects. I think women for a longer time have been mining our own lives for comedy and have been willing to laugh at ourselves in a way that sometimes that's not necessarily where men's comedy comes from.
In her new book about marriage, The Longest Date, Shupak puts her own life on display. She tells stories of her imperfect romance.
People say, wow, your marriage is like a long date. And I say, well, it's not clear if it's a good or bad date. But it's a long one. My husband said, you know, if you put out a book about what a great couple we are and something happens when we break up, you're going to feel really silly. And I said, it's not a book about what a great couple we are. And maybe, I think he comes off very well, but we're not the perfect couple. That's the point I'm trying to say, you know, there's no such thing.
She also chronicles her struggles with infertility.
I talk about everything from IVF to choosing an egg donor to trying adoption, and including some miscarriages, terminations. I hope particularly women dealing with infertility who are going through it or who have been through it will feel comforted and less alone.
The book is being made into a TV show. Shupak is working on the pilot with Jake Kasdan, the executive producer of New Girl and a veteran sitcom director.
He loved the book, and he's newly married and has young kids, and said there hasn't been a show about marriage like this. Just kind of an honest, romantic, funny show about a couple in a while.
While representation is far from equal, women are more likely to be working behind the scenes in TV than in film. According to a recent report, women fill more than a quarter of behind-the-scenes roles in television, compared with fewer than 1/5 of those roles in film.
There's things that I think women are reluctant to say yes to because I joke that my friends and I often feel we have to take a Sundance Institute workshop before we can direct a film. Whereas men, I know, they do one episode of television and they're like, I'm directing a film. It takes a very special kind of woman to want to grasp those reins, but I am starting to believe more in just say yes, learn it, do it, you can do it. How bad can it be?
So are the women you know, the millennials, are they as afraid to take charge as their predecessors? And
I love
boomers?
that the women I know, because I only know millennials. You know, I love Cindy Shupak, and I think what she's doing is so great, because from her time when she was single and a writer at Sex and the City to now, she writes about relationships that are real instead of kind of regurgitating this fairy tale fluff that we've been fed for so long. But I also think that women aren't afraid. I don't think millennials are afraid. I don't think boomers are afraid. I think we calculate risk differently. And I love that Shupak said that about how men are like, oh, I'm ready to direct a feature film, versus women just want to be a little bit more prepared.
And it's true across industries, but any idea why, I mean, this may not be a fair question, but any idea why women do better in TV than in films? I think smaller budgets, maybe?
But perhaps that's a great part of it. I think film is very difficult. Let's look at Angelina Jolie and the great disparity between her and other leading actors in pay, for example. So I think just breaking out in both fields is definitely tougher. One of my favorite examples is Mindy Kaling, one of my favorite actresses who broke out from behind the small screen. She was a writer on The Office, a hit
and
show.
A woman of color.
And a woman of color. And she's
TV
just now come into her own, but she's been around. And I think that is, for millennials and everybody alike, that's a sign of the times to come,
well,
when a woman like her can make it.
I mean, who would be her equivalent? I mean, she's doing Scandal, she's done Grey's Anatomy. Who would be her kind of equivalent in Hollywood? I think there's kind of no question that Hollywood is terribly sexist. We need to break the celluloid seal.
But is it? But why is it? Because you have to raise, you know, $50 million to do a movie, but you have to, as I did, only raise, you know, in the 5 figures to start this TV show.
Yes and no, but I feel like that also implies that women can't handle or can't manage large budgets, which is such a
no. I'm not saying that.
I know you're not saying that. I'm just saying that it puts women, that room out there.
You know, women still have less access to venture capital, and making a movie is clearly much more expensive.
The economics
than
have
starting
certainly played a role.
No.
I also that there's more opportunity in television. I mean, there's simply more outlets, more opportunities. There's web-based shows now. Maybe it's just a little bit easier to break in there, and then people move on. When I think about Hollywood, I actually think a lot about women. I don't usually watch the Oscars. I watched them this year. I realize this is film, but I mean, it was women from music to sets to actors. I mean, everyone was a woman. So I feel sort of very positive about this picture.
Well, my niece is an actress, and she's been in tons of films and is very successful. And my sister has her own production company, so they're living the Hollywood life. And there's a ton of sexism in Hollywood, and I think Bonnie's correct in that you need to follow the money. Because normally when you find inequality, or you want to find out what's at the heart of something, follow the money. And it takes a lot of money to get a film. It takes a lot.
What about using humor to get through hard times, like problems with infertility? I mean, I can see using humor in all kinds of situations. That one strikes me as a little bit rough.
Yeah, she reminded me actually a lot of Caitlin Flanagan, so the Atlantic columnist who also writes very similarly, also uses humor for these, touching moments, leaving your children when you go back to work, or trying to manage twins, as she describes. Very similar. These are in many ways sort of, you have to laugh at them, right? When you're up at 3 in the morning changing twins' diapers, what can you do but sort of laugh at this new picture of your life? So
I love that. I love that she uses humor, and I relate with her a lot. I feel like I think it's a surviving mechanism. I think it's a coping mechanism. But also, what's the alternative? Are you going to like freak out and have a nervous breakdown instead of laugh and
or
that too
more
in the back
likely
room?
just get very depressed and crawl back into bed? Or
Yeah,
something.
but that's why I'm saying it's a survival mechanism. And she writes about her life, and I write about my life, and I feel like you've got to have humor. It's how you connect with people.
Well, she's obviously married to a very secure man too. I mean, seriously, think about that. My wife just looked at me and said, "This book is not about our relationship."
Well, it's
the
not
long date.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Well, not only that, she said that because her husband moved into her house, so she said that for a while she actually felt like he was a house guest that wouldn't leave. But it's also important to know
quickly
that this is her second marriage. Her first husband was actually gay, so she's dealt with humor and tragedy.
All right, you got to deal with that with humor. That's it for this edition. Follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.